In June 2020, Wirecard AG was listed on Germany's DAX stock index, valued at approximately 24 billion euros. The company processed payments for major global brands, handled transactions for millions of customers, and was celebrated as Germany's answer to Silicon Valley. Financial analysts called it a fintech revolution. Then, in less than 1 week, 1.9 billion euros vanished from the company's balance sheet. Not lost in bad investments. Not stolen by hackers. It simply never existed. Within days, one of Europe's most celebrated tech companies collapsed into bankruptcy, revealing the largest corporate fraud in modern German history. But what few people know is that the warning signs were everywhere for years, deliberately ignored by regulators, auditors, and investors who chose to believe a story too good to be true. The story begins not in Munich's sleek corporate towers, but in a small software company founded in 1999 during the first dot-com boom. Wirecard's origins were modest. The company started as a payment processing service for online gambling and adult entertainment websites, industries that traditional banks refused to touch and all. There was nothing glamorous about early Wirecard. It operated in regulatory gray zones, processing transactions that respectable financial institutions avoided. But precisely because it served these marginal markets, Wirecard developed technical expertise in digital payments that would later become its greatest selling point. In 2002, Markus Braun became CEO. Braun was an Austrian with a PhD in computer science and experience in management consulting. He was soft-spoken, wore wire-rimmed glasses, and projected an image of technical precision and German engineering discipline. Under Braun's leadership, Wirecard began transforming from a niche payment processor into what it claimed was a global fintech powerhouse. Traditional payment systems were slow, expensive, and controlled by banks that understood neither technology nor the speed of modern commerce. Wirecard promised to revolutionize this. It would build a seamless digital payment infrastructure, connecting merchants, banks, and customers across borders. The vision seemed perfect for the emerging digital economy. By 2005, Wirecard had moved aggressively into mainstream markets. It partnered with financial institutions, signed contracts with airlines and retailers, and began expanding into Asia. The company's reported revenue grew rapidly. In 2006, Wirecard went public, listing on Germany's stock exchange. The market reception was enthusiastic. Here, finally, was a German tech company that could compete with American and Chinese giants. Germany, long criticized for falling behind in digital innovation, had found a champion. Politicians praised Wirecard. Investors celebrated it. Financial journalists wrote glowing profiles of Markus Braun, portraying him as the visionary who would drag German business into the 21st century. But beneath the surface, cracks were already forming. In 2008, just 2 years after going public, questions emerged about Wirecard's accounting practices. A series of investigative reports published in German financial media questioned whether the company's Asian subsidiaries were generating the revenues Wirecard claimed. The reports suggested that third-party partners in Southeast Asia, which supposedly handled massive transaction volumes for Wirecard, might not exist or were significantly smaller than represented. Wirecard's response was immediate and aggressive. The company denied all allegations, threatened legal action against journalists, and claimed the reports were part of a coordinated short-selling attack designed to manipulate its stock price. Remarkably, the strategy worked. German financial regulators, BaFin, launched investigations not into Wirecard, but into the journalists and short sellers who questioned the company. The implicit message was clear. Criticizing Germany's tech success story would not be tolerated. International investors, seeing regulators defend Wirecard, interpreted this as validation. If Germany's financial authorities trusted Wirecard enough to prosecute its critics, the company must be legitimate. The stock price, which had briefly dipped, recovered and continued climbing. What nobody understood at the time was that this pattern, denying allegations and attacking critics while regulators looked the other way, would repeat for more than a decade. By 2012, Wirecard's reported revenue had grown to over 1 billion euros annually. The company signed high-profile partnerships with Visa and MasterCard, processed payments for major airlines, and expanded into mobile payments and digital wallets. Marcus Brown became a fixture at European tech conferences, presenting Wirecard as proof that Europe could innovate as boldly as Silicon Valley. The company moved into a modern headquarters in Aschheim, a suburb of Munich, where employees worked in open-plan offices designed to evoke the culture of tech startups. Everything about Wirecard's public image communicated success, innovation, and legitimacy. But the discrepancies were multiplying. By 2015, several financial analysts had begun noticing inconsistencies in Wirecard's financial statements. The company's cash flow didn't match its reported profits. Revenue from Asian operations seemed disproportionately high relative to the known size of those markets. Third-party partners that Wirecard claimed processed hundreds of millions in transactions annually appeared to have tiny offices with minimal staff when analysts requested detailed documentation. Wirecard provided dense technical reports that were difficult to verify and often cited confidentiality agreements with partners as reasons for withholding specifics. The explanations were always plausible enough to avoid outright rejection, but never transparent enough to satisfy scrutiny. In October 2016, an anonymous group began circulating research reports on Wirecard. The reports were meticulous. They contained detailed analysis of Wirecard's financial statements, corporate structure, and business relationships in Asia. The conclusion was damning. Significant portions of Wirecard's revenue, particularly from subsidiaries in Singapore and the Philippines, appeared to be fabricated. The reports presented evidence that third-party partners Wirecard claimed as major clients were shell companies with no real operations. The analysis suggested that Wirecard was using a network of fake entities to create the illusion of massive transaction volumes, booking fictional revenue to inflate its valuation. The reports were published on obscure websites and shared among hedge funds and financial analysts. Wirecard's response followed the familiar playbook. The company issued statements calling the reports false and defamatory. It hired expensive law firms to threaten legal action against anyone distributing the research. Marcus Brown appeared on German financial television, calmly dismissing the allegations as manipulation by short sellers who wanted to profit from Wirecard's stock decline. He presented the criticism as a conspiracy against German innovation, framing Wirecard as a victim of jealous competitors and unscrupulous speculators. German media, still largely sympathetic to Wirecard, echoed this narrative. Once again, BaFin investigated not Wirecard, but the people questioning it. The regulator even banned short selling of Wirecard's stock temporarily, an extraordinary move that signaled official confidence in the company. For investors, this regulatory support was reassuring. If Germany's financial authorities were willing to ban short selling to protect Wirecard, surely the company's financials were solid. Institutional investors, including some of the world's largest asset managers, continued holding or even increased their positions in Wirecard stock. By 2017, the company's market capitalization had reached approximately 10 billion euros. In September 2018, Wirecard was added to Germany's DAX index, the country's most prestigious stock benchmark, replacing Commerzbank. This was a historic moment. Wirecard became the first fintech company ever included in the DAX, joining industrial giants like BMW, Siemens, and Volkswagen. For German politicians and business leaders, Wirecard's inclusion symbolized Germany's arrival as a digital economy power. But the same month Wirecard joined the DAX, the Financial Times published the first of what would become a relentless series of investigative reports. The newspaper had obtained internal Wirecard documents leaked by whistleblowers inside the company. These documents revealed systematic accounting fraud. They showed that Wirecard's Singapore office had used forged contracts and fake invoices to inflate revenue. Employees had been instructed to create false documentation for auditors. Transactions that Wirecard claimed to process through third-party partners in Asia didn't exist. The partners themselves were often shell companies controlled by individuals with close ties to Wirecard executives. The Financial Times presented bank records, emails, and witness testimony supporting these allegations. Wirecard's reaction was furious. The company issued statements accusing the Financial Times of publishing lies, hired private investigators to follow the journalists writing the stories, and filed criminal complaints in Germany, claiming market manipulation. Marcus Braun held press conferences insisting Wirecard's financials were accurate and audited by AI, one of the world's largest accounting firms. He pointed to AI's annual audits as proof of legitimacy. How could a company audited by a Big Four firm for years be committing fraud? The logic seemed sound. Investors, particularly those unfamiliar with the details, trusted the auditor's reputation more than journalistic investigations. Wirecard's stock price, though volatile, remained elevated. Throughout 2019, the Financial Times continued publishing investigations. Each report revealed new layers of fraud. Wirecard's operations in Dubai were fake. The company's claimed partnerships with major retailers in India couldn't be verified. Revenue from processing payments in Indonesia appeared fabricated. Former employees came forward describing a corporate culture where questioning financial discrepancies led to termination or intimidation. The pattern was consistent across multiple geographies. Wirecard claimed massive transaction volumes processed through third-party partners, but when investigators attempted to verify these partners, they found either shell companies, tiny operations incapable of handling the claimed volume, or businesses that denied having significant relationships with Wirecard. German regulators, however, remained on Wirecard's side. In April 2019, BaFin announced it was investigating not Wirecard's accounting, but whether the Financial Times and short sellers were engaging in market manipulation. The regulator filed criminal complaints against journalists and investors who had bet against Wirecard's stock. This was an astonishing move. Germany's financial watchdog was actively prosecuting the people exposing fraud while continuing to express confidence in the company committing it. For Wirecard, BaFin's support was invaluable. Each regulatory action against critics reinforced the narrative that Wirecard was a victim of a conspiracy, not a perpetrator of fraud. International investors, seeing Germany's government effectively defending Wirecard, assumed the criticisms must be baseless. By late 2019, Wirecard's reported annual revenue had reached approximately 2.8 billion euros. The company employed over 5,000 people worldwide. It had offices in dozens of countries, partnerships with hundreds of financial institutions, and processed billions in transactions annually, or at least, that's what it claimed. Behind this facade, the reality was collapsing. Wirecard's auditor, AA, had grown increasingly uncomfortable. The firm had been asking for documentation of cash balances and revenue from Asian operations for months, and Wirecard's responses were evasive. Internal communications at AI showed auditors expressing doubt about whether certain transactions were real, but the firm continued signing off on Wirecard's annual reports, unwilling to trigger a scandal by refusing certification. In February 2020, KPMG, hired by Wirecard to conduct a special audit to address the Financial Times allegations, released its findings. The report was devastating. KPMG stated it could not verify significant portions of Wirecard's reported revenue. The auditors had attempted to confirm transactions with third-party partners in Asia, but many partners refused to cooperate, provided contradictory information, or couldn't be located. Documentation Wirecard provided for massive transactions appeared suspicious. Bank confirmations for cash balances in Asia were inconsistent. KPMG stopped short of explicitly calling it fraud, but the message was clear: Wirecard's financials could not be trusted. The company's stock dropped sharply on the news, but Wirecard's response was predictable. Management dismissed KPMG's concerns as misunderstandings, blamed uncooperative third parties, and promised to provide additional documentation that would resolve all questions. Months passed. Wirecard's auditor, AA, was now under intense pressure to finalize the 2019 annual audit. The firm needed confirmation of cash balances that Wirecard claimed to hold in accounts with banks in Asia. These accounts supposedly contained over 1.9 billion euros, representing nearly half of Wirecard's balance sheet. A requested bank statements directly from the financial institutions. In early June 2020, AI received documents from two banks in the Philippines, purporting to confirm that Wirecard held 1.9 billion euros in accounts managed by trustees. The documents appeared legitimate, bearing bank letterheads and signatures. AI, satisfied, began preparing to sign off on Wirecard's 2019 financial statements. But on June 18, 2020, the two Philippine banks issued public statements. Both banks confirmed they had issued the documents I received, but clarified that the documents were merely confirmations that the accounts existed, not that they contained any money. In fact, both banks stated the accounts had always been empty. No funds had ever been deposited. The 1.9 billion euros Wirecard claimed to hold simply didn't exist. The confirmation documents, which Wirecard had apparently used to reassure its auditor for years, were technically real but substantively meaningless. Wirecard had exploited a technicality, obtaining letters confirming the existence of accounts while misrepresenting those letters as proof the accounts held billions in cash. The revelation triggered immediate crisis. On June 18th, Wirecard's stock price collapsed, losing over 60% of its value in a single day. A announced it could not complete the audit and would not certify Wirecard's 2019 financial statements. Without certified financials, Wirecard was in breach of its loan agreements. Banks holding 2 billion euros in Wirecard debt immediately demanded repayment. Marcus Brown, who had spent 18 years building Wirecard into a DAX company, resigned as CEO. In a brief statement, he insisted he had been deceived by others within the company and was unaware of any fraud. He portrayed himself as a victim, shocked to discover that trusted subordinates had lied to him for years. Few believed this story. Brown had been CEO throughout the period when fake revenue was booked, fake partners were created, and fake bank balances were reported. The idea that he knew nothing strained credibility. On June 22, 2020, Wirecard's new management team acknowledged that the 1.9 billion euros probably never existed. The company admitted it had likely been the victim of, or participant in, a massive fraud involving fake transactions and fabricated cash balances over many years. The stock price, which had been worth over 100 euros per share weeks earlier, fell to under 2 euros. On June 25, 2020, Wirecard filed for insolvency. The company that had been Germany's fintech pride, valued at 24 billion euros at its peak, was bankrupt. Thousands of employees faced unemployment. Investors had lost billions. The same day, German authorities issued an arrest warrant for Marcus Brown on charges of fraud and market manipulation. He was arrested shortly after and held in custody. The scale of what had happened became clearer in the following weeks. Investigators discovered that Wirecard had been fabricating financial results for at least a decade. Much of the revenue the company reported from its Asian operations was fake. Third-party partners that supposedly processed payments for Wirecard were shell companies controlled by Wirecard insiders or associates. Contracts with major clients were forged. Bank documents were falsified. Wirecard had operated an elaborate multi-year scheme to create the illusion of a thriving global business, while the reality was far smaller. The fraud wasn't committed by a single rogue employee. It required coordination across multiple departments, involvement of senior executives, and complicity of external partners. And it had succeeded for years because auditors failed to verify claims, regulators dismissed warnings, and investors preferred the profitable illusion to uncomfortable truth. Jan Marsalek, Wirecard's former chief operating officer, disappeared. Marsalek had been responsible for overseeing the Asian operations where much of the fraud occurred. When German authorities attempted to arrest him, they discovered he had fled the country. Investigators believe Marsalek traveled to the Philippines, then vanished. Months later, reports emerged suggesting he had fled to Russia, possibly with assistance from intelligence services. Marsalek's disappearance added a surreal dimension to the scandal. This was no longer just corporate fraud. It involved international fugitives, allegations of intelligence agency involvement, and money trails leading to places far beyond Munich's corporate offices. The fallout was severe. Which had audited Wirecard for over a decade and failed to detect the fraud, faced intense criticism. German regulators launched investigations into why had repeatedly certified financial statements that were largely fabricated. The firm paid fines and faced lawsuits from investors who relied on its audits. BaFin, Germany's financial regulator, suffered a catastrophic loss of credibility. For years, the regulator had defended Wirecard and prosecuted its critics. BaFin's president resigned in disgrace. The German government ordered reforms, but the damage was done. International investors questioned whether German regulatory oversight could be trusted. By late 2020, criminal investigations had expanded. Prosecutors charged Markus Braun with fraud, breach of trust, and market manipulation. Investigators alleged that Braun had knowingly participated in inflating Wirecard's revenue and balance sheet, misleading investors and creditors for years. Braun denied the charges, maintaining he had been deceived by subordinates. But evidence presented by prosecutors suggested otherwise. Emails and internal documents showed Braun had been directly involved in discussions about how to present fake revenue, how to explain missing documentation to auditors, and how to deflect criticism from journalists and analysts. The portrait that emerged was of a CEO who built an empire on lies, defended it aggressively, and collapsed only when the lies could no longer be sustained. In 2021, Wirecard's remnants were sold off. The company's legitimate payment processing operations, which did exist and served real customers, were acquired by banks and fintech firms. Thousands of merchants that had used Wirecard services had to scramble to find alternative payment processors. The employees, many of whom had believed they worked for a legitimate tech company, faced unemployment and the stigma of association with Germany's largest corporate fraud. Investors who had held Wirecard stock watched their investments become worthless. Pension funds, asset managers, and individual investors collectively lost billions. Some had trusted the DAX listing, assuming that membership in Germany's premier stock index guaranteed legitimacy. They learned the opposite is. Prestige and regulatory approval are no substitute for rigorous verification. The Wirecard scandal revealed systematic failures at every level. Auditors failed to perform basic verification, accepting documents and explanations that should have triggered immediate red flags. Regulators prioritized protecting a national champion over investigating credible allegations. Journalists who exposed fraud were prosecuted while executives committing it were defended. Investors, dazzled by the promise of a German tech success story, ignored warning signs because believing the narrative was more profitable than questioning it. And throughout it all, Wirecard's executives exploited this ecosystem of complicity, using Germany's desire for a digital economy success story to shield a fraud that, in hindsight, was neither sophisticated nor particularly well hidden. Markus Braun's trial began in December 2022. Prosecutors presented evidence that he had orchestrated Wirecard's fraud, knowingly booking fake revenue, inflating cash balances, and deceiving investors for over a decade. Braun's defense argued he had been misled by Jan Marsalek and other subordinates who operated independently. But the prosecution's evidence was extensive. Internal communications showed Braun discussing how to fabricate transactions, how to explain discrepancies to auditors, and how to attack journalists investigating the company. Former employees testified that Braun was deeply involved in the day-to-day operations of Wirecard's Asian subsidiaries, the very units where most of the fraud occurred. The defense's portrayal of Braun as an innocent victim seemed increasingly implausible. As of 2024, Braun's trial continues. Jan Marsalek remains a fugitive, believed to be hiding in Russia beyond the reach of German authorities. Several other Wirecard executives have been arrested and face trial. The civil lawsuits filed by investors against Wirecard, and others are ongoing, with billions in damages being claimed. The scandal has prompted Germany to overhaul its financial regulation, introduce stricter auditing standards, and increase penalties for corporate fraud. But no reforms can undo the damage. Wirecard's collapse destroyed trust in German corporate governance, demonstrated how easily auditors and regulators can be co-opted, and revealed that prestige and official endorsement mean nothing when fraud is systemic. The story of Wirecard is not a story of criminal genius. It's a story of willful blindness. The fraud was not sophisticated. Wirecard claimed to process billions in payments through third-party partners that didn't exist. It reported cash balances in accounts that were empty. It forged contracts and fabricated transactions. Any competent auditor asking basic questions and demanding verification should have uncovered it within months. But nobody did, because too many people had incentives not to look. Auditors earned fees for certifying financials. Regulators wanted to protect Germany's tech reputation. Investors made money as the stock price rose. Journalists who questioned the story were attacked and prosecuted. And so the fraud continued, year after year, until the lies became impossible to sustain and the entire structure collapsed in days. Today, Wirecard's headquarters in Asheim stand largely empty. The company that once symbolized Germany's digital future is gone, leaving behind only lawsuits, criminal trials, and lessons about the ease with which trust can be weaponized. Markus Braun, who built a €24 billion company on fabrications, now faces decades in prison. Jan Marsalek, who orchestrated much of the fraud, remains free somewhere beyond Germany's reach. And the investors, employees, and regulators who believed Wirecard's story have learned a hard truth. Credibility is earned through transparency, not through prestige. A company listed on the DAX, audited by a Big Four firm, and defended by government regulators can still be a fraud. The only protection is skepticism, verification, and the willingness to ask uncomfortable questions even when everyone insists there's nothing to see. Now tell me, did you know about Wirecard before it collapsed? Leave your opinion in the comments and suggest topics you want to see in our next video send. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel to support our work uncovering the truth behind history's biggest business scandals.